Mary Elizabeth Jane Colter was an American architect and designer. She was one of the very few female American architects of her time. She was the designer of many landmark buildings and spaces for the Fred Harvey Company and the Santa Fe Railroad, notably in Grand Canyon National Park. Her work had enormous influence as she created a style, blending Spanish colonial revival and mission revival architecture with Native American motifs and rustic elements that would become popular throughout the Southwest. Colter was a perfectionist, spent a lifetime advocating and defending her aesthetic vision. We see her influence in the sets of MGM's 1946 Harvey Girls, which highlights the civilizational aspects of the Fred Harvey Restaurant Company in the American West. Mary Colter was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Irish immigrants William and Rebecca Crozier Colter. Her family moved to Colorado and Texas before settling down in St. Paul, Minnesota, the town she considered to be her home and would be buried in when Mary was 11. By the time she was 17, her father was dead, and she realized she would have to carve a career out for herself. In 1880, the town of St. Paul boasted a population of 40,000 people, including a large population of Sioux Indians. As a child, a family friend or uncle, John Graham, presented the Colter family with Sioux drawings made by prisoners at Fort Keogh, Montana. This is when her fascination with Native American cultures began. When the Indian community was ravaged by a smallpox outbreak, Colter's mother tried to burn the Native American things they had for fear it would get her family sick. But Mary hid the drawings and held on to them for her entire life. Mary kept these Sioux drawings, bequeathing them to the Custer Battlefield National Monument in 1956. She graduated high school in 1883 at the age of 14. After her father died in 1886, Colter's family moved to Oakland, California, where Colter attended the California School of Design, now the San Francisco Art Institute, until 1890, where she studied art and design. So the myth that American women couldn't get educated until the 1960s, perpetuated by various feminist movements, is totally false. Colter promised that when she graduated, she would return to St. Paul to financially support her mother and sister. Her older sister, Harriet, was chronically ill. While in San Francisco, Colter apprenticed in an architect's office to gain experience and support herself. She was taught by teachers including Arthur Frank Matthews, who painted the earliest known portrait of Colter and was one of the founders of the arts and crafts movement in the United States. After teaching at the Stout Manual Training School in Wisconsin for a year, Colter moved back to St. Paul and taught art, drafting, and architecture. Besides being a respected professor and counselor to her students, she was very active in St. Paul's cultural circles as a lecturer at the University of Minnesota Extension School, a book reviewer and editor for the St. Paul Daily Globe, a student of archaeology and history, and a metal craft practitioner. In 1891, James Huff Stout, a lumber magnate who represented Menominee in the Wisconsin State Senate, founded the Stout Manual Training School as a manual training school, the first of several schools he launched in the area. It is now part of the University of Wisconsin. The manual training movement was an educational philosophy that influenced modern vocational education. In the United States, this philosophy was established in the 1870s and used to train engineers, later making its way into public education where it collapsed in the 1970s to make way for feel-good arts and music programs. Manual training promoted a classical liberal education, but emphasized practical application, such as practical judgment, perception, visual accuracy, and manual dexterity. Students learned drafting, mechanics, woodworking, metalworking over theory, in addition to science, mathematics, language, literary, and history. After the American Civil War, leaders of industry and politics turned to public education to augment existing apprenticeship programs because they needed workers. By incorporating manual training philosophy into the curricula, we see the noblesse oblige of the Gilded Age extend here, as American so-called robber barons focused on American worker populations instead of foreign populations, which we see today with the H-1B visa expansion program letting in hundreds of thousands of foreigners in America every year. And the H-1B visa program has been part of the Hart-Celler immigration expansion, which has seen over 6 million foreigners enter the United States legally since the passing of that act. Colter taught at the Mechanic Arts High School for 15 years and lectured at the University Extension School. At the time, she was involved in the arts and crafts woman, was a club woman, and gave several lectures and classes related to art. In 1902, Native American art collector Minnie Harvey Huckle supposedly helped Colter obtain a summer job with her father's Fred Harvey Company, operator of the famous rail stop Harvey House restaurants. She was responsible for decorating the Indian building at the Alvarado Hotel in Albuquerque, which has since been demolished. Some scholars believe that Fred Harvey's daughter, Minnie Harvey Huckle, probably met Colter in St. Paul, perhaps at the New Century Club, a women's civic group of which Mary was a member, and where she lectured on topics such as the utilitarian basis of the aesthetic in 1900 and the Red Craftsman in 1907. The Alvarado Hotel was one of the first Mission Revival buildings in New Mexico. The Indian buildings, one of Minnie's ideas executed by her husband, were meant to entertain passengers as trains made stops to replenish water and fuel and participated in Fred Harvey Company rail stop restaurants. Colter was given the interior decor challenge of arranging sales rooms so tourists could imagine displaying the goods in their own homes. She worked with reinforced concrete expert Charles Whittlesley on the El Tovar Hotel and began designing a curio shop. Upon returning to St. Paul to teach in that fall, Colter continued her work on the curio shop, which became Hopi House. From 1902 through 1948, Colter served as the primary architect and designer for the Fred Harvey Company, completing 21 hotels, curio shops, and rest areas along one of the major routes of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. Despite its inherent commercial purpose, Colter's designs transcended the kitsch of a burgeoning tourism industry to capture the mystery and romance of the American Southwest. Some characteristic features of her designs include tiny windows allowing shafts of light to accent red sandstone walls, low ceilings of saplings and twigs resting on peeled log rustic beams, haciendas enclosing intimate courtyards, rough boulder structures built into the earth as if part of a natural rock formation. These details shaped American visions of the Southwest and our national parks for generations to come. Hopi House is located on the south rim of the Grand Canyon within Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. Built in 1904 as concessionaire facilities as the South Rim were being developed, again brought in by the mighty railroads, Hopi House is the first of 8 projects at the Grand Canyon designed by Mary, along with Bright Angel Lodge, Hermit's Rest, Lookout Studio, Phantom Ranch, Desert View Watchtower, Colter Hall, and Victor Hall, these latter two being employee dormitories, predating Google's idea of work and live in the same place for decades. These buildings were built from 1904 until 1948. Hopi House was built as a market for Native American crafts, made by artisans on site. The Hopi, as the historic inhabitants of the area, were chosen as featured artisans, and their crafts were sold to tourists. The building was designed to closely resemble a traditional Hopi pueblo. It opened on New Year's Day, 1905, 2 weeks before the El Tovar Hotel, located just to its west, was opened, creating a joint tourist experience. In these projects, she termed recreations, including the Desert View Watchtower, Mary almost devoutly followed quite closely in general architectural features great prototypes, by employing indigenous builders and using local materials. For the next 7 years, Colter continued working for Harvey from St. Paul. She was a Harvey girl, the name for Harvey's waitresses who often married cowboys and thus settled the West, in her own right. She continued teaching and her involvement in art and clubs in the city. In 1908, she moved with her mother and sister to Seattle to take a position developing the decoration department for the Frederick and Nelson department store in Seattle. But the city would not be lucky for her. She left the position in 1909 when her mother, Rebecca, became ill and died. The Colter sisters returned to St. Paul to bury their mother in the family plot. Harriet, Mary's sister, died in Los Angeles in 1923. Colter began working full-time for the Fred Harvey Company in 1910, moving from interior designer to architect, in a position based in Kansas City. For the next 38 years, Colter served as chief architect and decorator for the Fred Harvey Company. She would not retire until she was 79 years old. As one of the country's few female architects, and arguably the most outstanding, she often worked in rugged, harsh conditions to complete 21 landmark hotels, commercial lodges, and public spaces for the Fred Harvey Company, which was then run by the founder's sons. Her preference for natural materials gave her the nickname of Rustic Architect. Fred Harvey developed the West along the Santa Fe's main railroad route through the strategic use of restaurant efficiency, clean-cut, conservative white young women he hired, high-end tourism, and quality souvenirs with strong connections to the land. Anthropologists on his staff located the most appealing Native American art and artifacts like pottery, jewelry, and leatherwork. His merchandisers designed goods based on those original artifacts, leaving the originals with the tribes. In strategic locations, Colter produced commercial architecture with striking decor, based on concern for authenticity, floor plans calculated for good user experience and commercial function, and a playful sense of the dramatic, both inside and out. The Santa Fe Railroad bought the La Fonda Hotel on the plaza of the old city of Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1925 and leased it to the Harvey Company to operate. For a major expansion, Colter did the interior design and decor. She hired artists and artisans from the nearby pueblos to make furniture. Again, the reliance on local talent instead of foreign help made the Harvey and Colter names. Native American styles were employed in handcrafted chandeliers, copper and tin lighting fixtures, tiles, and textiles. La Fonda became the most successful Harvey House hotel. Its striking blend of Pueblo and Spanish artistic influence, known today as the Santa Fe style, became very popular across the region. Colter created a series of remarkable works in the Grand Canyon National Park you can visit today: the 1905 Hoppy House, the 1914 Hermit's Rest, and the Observatory Lookout Studio. Its asymmetrical roofline mimics the Grand Canyon's natural shape to create the illusion the studio is an extension of the canyon's stone walls. The 1932 Desert View Watchtower, a 70-foot-tall rock tower with a hidden steel structure, and the woman's restroom larger and closer to the entrance than the man's, as well as the 1935 Bright Angel Lodge complex and the 1922 Phantom Ranch buildings at the bottom of the canyon, are all open for visitors. Colter decorated but did not design the park's El Tovar Hotel. In 1987, the Mary Jane Colter buildings, as a group, were listed as a National Historic Landmark. Colter's work is credited with inspiring the Pueblo Deco style, a mix of Pueblo Revival, Spanish Colonial Revival, Mission Revival, Streamline Modern, American Craftsman, and Arts and Crafts movement styles. The Harvey Company got the concession in 1922 to operate a camp at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Considering the Phantom Ranch's location, Colter's use of on-site fieldstone and rough-hewn wood was deemed the only practical thing for permanent buildings that replaced tents. When Colter produced sketches for a series of cabins, everyone was initially pleased until it was announced the accommodations would be named Roosevelt's Chalets. At this, Colter snatched up her blueprints and declared, "Not if you are going to be using my work." She had already chosen the name, Phantom Ranch. Phantom Ranch is the only lodging below the canyon rim that can be reached by mule, on foot, or by rafting the Colorado River. In the following years, the innovative work became a de facto model for subsequent National Park Service and Civilian Conservation Corps structures, influencing the look and feel of an entire genre of parkitecture, often called National Park Service rustic. Mary's structures at the Grand Canyon set the precedent for using only on-site materials and bold, large-scale design elements. For her Bright Angel Lodge on the South Rim, she used a 6-foot scale model to ensure the lodge and cabins fit the landscape. The lodge features a remarkable geological fireplace in the history room, with rocks arranged ceiling to floor in the same order as the geologic strata along the Bright Angel Trail down the canyon wall. A chain-smoking perfectionist who would later design ashtrays, Colter cared about backstory and attractive features. She conceived Hermit's Rest as a sort of folly, as if it had been wired together by a reclusive mountain man. The simple log and stone building was designed to look like a rustic getaway that Louis Boucher, a trail guide and infamous hermit who once lived in the area, would have built. With this in mind, Colter ordered the fireplace to be intentionally streaked with soot to add an aged effect. The Hopi house was designed in sandstone to resemble a Hopi pueblo. The watchtower was the product of travel and research, and Mary cared enough to write a book, a manual for drivers and guides descriptive of the Indian watchtower at Desert View and its relation, architecturally, to the prehistoric ruins of the Southwest. The original paintings inside the tower were by native artist Fred Harvey. Some argue Colter's pioneering masterwork might have been the 1923 El Navajo in Gallup, New Mexico, remarkable for its forward-looking fusion of a Native American design on the severe Art Deco building by Santa Fe Railway architect A.E. Harrison. Of the El Navajo Hotel, Colter mused, "I have always longed to carry out the true Indian idea, to plan a hotel strictly Indian, with none of the conventional modern motifs." Her breakthrough creation incorporated Navajo sand paintings, rugs with hand-carved and hand-painted furniture. The original plans sketched about 100 bedrooms and 15 shared baths, but it was razed to make way for widening Route 77 in 1957, shortly before Colter's death. She saw demolitions of a few of her other projects before she died, causing her to despair it's possible to live too long. She stated this just 1 year before she died. Colter herself described the 1930 La Posada Hotel to be her masterpiece. The sprawling hacienda-style Spanish colonial revival building in Winslow, Arizona, has been called the last great railroad hotel built in America. Colter was architect and designer for the entire resort, with rooms such as the Turquoise Room, from the buildings to the acres of gardens, the furniture, china, even the maids' uniforms she designed. Closed in 1957, in a long decline, it was first a drab 1960s office building for the Santa Fe, and then empty, until the National Trust for Historic Preservation placed the hotel on its annual Most Endangered list and funneled money into the civil rights movement instead of American heritage. Alan Affeldt heard about the endangered hotel, and in 1996 he and his wife Tina Mayon, an artist, purchased it and soon reopened parts of the hotel for business. However, the hotel was without many of its original design elements, which had been auctioned off, and remains a shell of itself. Today, a museum of Mayon's paintings is on the second floor. Works by Dan Lutzik line the sculpture court. A museum of Route 66 is going into the former depot. The compound and gardens, restored to the original and intended grandeur, are the core elements of the La Posada Historic District on the National Register. Late in her career, Colter designed the exuberant Harvey House restaurant at the 1939 Los Angeles Union Station. Under a spectacular arched ceiling, a dazzling floor appears to be random zigzags and geometrics. But from another angle, the pattern is a block-long Navajo blanket made of linoleum tiles. The fabulous dining room and her sleek, streamlined, modern cocktail lounge were padlocked, except for occasional movie shoots and Los Angeles Conservancy tours until 2018. In October 2018, the restaurant was reopened as Imperial Western Beer Company. Not long before her retirement, Colter took on the 1947 renovation of the Painted Desert Inn in Arizona's Petrified Forest National Park. During the Depression, the 1922 inn had been overhauled by Civilian Conservation Corps workers to the Mission Revival style, using local materials and Native American motifs. Then Colter supervised the refreshening, providing a new color scheme, and commissioned Hopi artist Fred Harvey to put murals in the dining areas. Showing that she was unafraid of the modern when the situation called for it, she installed plate glass windows to open up views of splendid scenery. Closed in 1963, the inn survived a threatened demolition and was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. It reopened in 2006, restored to the way it looked circa 1949 after Colter's redesign. Colter was also the creator of China, Membranio China, and flatware for the glamorous super cheap Chicago-Los Angeles rail service, began in 1936 by the Santa Fe Railroad. Colter, herself by then an Indian art expert, based her design on 1100 AD Mimbres patterns excavated by her friends Harriet and Cornelius Cosgrove at the Swartz Ruin in New Mexico from 1924 until 1927. Membranio china was produced by the Onondaga Pottery Company of Syracuse, New York, under its better-known trade name, Syracuse China, until 1970. The luxury super chief and business class dining services were discontinued after the train was turned over to Amtrak in May 1971, and today the Southwest Chief covers the previous route. Later that year, Membranio plates and pieces became available to ordinary individuals for the first time instead of railway customers, disposed of in 2 large public offerings. Membranio Railroad China remains avidly and competitively collected, with single plates selling for hundreds of dollars. A line of authorized reproductions has been sold since 1989. Colter retired to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1948. She donated her collection of Native American pottery and Indian relics to Mesa Verde National Park. She had to watch as many of her famous works were destroyed during her lifetime as the automobile replaced the train. She died in January 1958. 4 of her Grand Canyon National Park buildings are protected within the Mary Jane Colter National Historic Landmark District. In 1986, she was inducted into the Arizona Women's Hall of Fame. In 2009, she was inducted into the National Cowgirl Museum and Hall of Fame. She is considered by some to be a Californian architect, but she was born, raised, and taught in the Midwest. Frank Waters, the historian and expert on Native Americans of the Southwest, in his book Masked Gods of 1950, recalled Colter as an incomprehensible woman in pants, riding horseback, sketching ruins, and studying construction details. Although her contemporaries often called her a decorator, we have to remember she lived in an age where your degree mattered less than what you could actually do, practice over theory. In this age of so-called experts, her projects, of which 4, Hopi House, Hermit's Rest, Lookout Studio, and Desert View Watchtower, have been designated National Historic Landmarks, indicate strong architectural skill, and today she is classified as an architect.